Welcome to the Regular Joe's podcast. I'm Dave Pisani.
I'm Barry Kay.
I'm Todd Pleasant.
And I'm Brian Mix.
All right, today something different. This sort of, I guess, 2-month long Greg Jien Heritage Auction is being talked about, not only by us, by just about everyone who's in the hobby. So Brian's got a longtime friend who knew Greg. They've known each other for a long time. He's got an amazing resume of his own that we'll hear about. And his name is Max Cervantes. And Brian will give us a little intro. Max is here with us. Go ahead, Brian.
My friend Max, I've known since 1976. He's probably the fan I've known the longest. We met through Logan's Run. You guys know how much I love that movie, and Max loves it even more. If you want to hear an incredible story of him visiting the set of Logan's Run, listen to his podcast, the Max EFX podcast. It'll blow your mind. Max is one of those guys that made the dream come true. He was a prop builder fan who built Star Trek props when he was a kid, who then turned it into a business and built Star Trek props for real. Max has worked at HMS and worked on movies like Beetlejuice, and the one I'm the most jealous of, he worked on Star Trek: The Next Generation. My favorite Max story is at StarCon 77. There was a run given by a guy whose name is, I'm forgetting, but Max will remember it, where they actually had a working flame gun. And nice. They chased a runner around the pool and then shot that runner, who burst into flames and fell in the pool. And it was
oh my God, really?
We all applauded. It was amazing. It was amazing. And I find out 35 years later, the guy that fell in the pool was Max.
Oh my God!
I had no idea. Yeah. So without any further buttering up Max, I want to bring him on board. Max, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you guys for having me on board. Just so everybody understands, since we're fresh talking about it, the guy that had the working flame gun was a guy named Bill Blake.
That's it.
He was under contract actually by MGM to help advertise and make sure it was kept in the public eye, Logan's Run, amongst sci-fi fandom. They had given Bill the original working flame gun. I know they made more than just the two we see in the movie. They had multiples. How many exactly, we don't really know. And they had given Bill 2 original Sandman costumes, the laser slashed one from when he first runs out of the New U, and a nice pristine one. Bill was about the same height and build as Michael York, so they actually gave him 2 of Michael York's original costumes.
Wow.
He also had been given 2 of Jenny Aguilar's original costumes, her nice ones from when she was still in the city. But yes, we had decided at StarCon just to stage this. We did not get any permission from the convention. We didn't ask anybody if it was okay. But Bill was a professional. Bill had been working in the film business already before me. He was like in his late 20s or so, I believe. And Bill was a very accomplished makeup effects artist. And Bill had 2 of his good friends who were both professional Hollywood stuntmen. And so he had asked them about what to do and how to do the run safely and everything. And it worked out great. One of Bill's 2 stuntmen friends was or is a fellow named Tom Morga. Tom Morga ended up being Leonard Nimoy's stunt double in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Star Trek II, Star Trek III, and Star Trek IV. Tom can even be seen on camera as himself. He is one of the patrons of the bar in Star Trek III. He comes walking into the bar with a young, beautiful girl on his arm, and they come walking in while 2 other people are playing a holographic biplane attack game. And as another bit of trivia, that bar set, they didn't build it custom because Trek 3 was done on such a shoestring budget. That is actually the medical bay set from Star Trek: The Motion Picture redressed.
Oh, wow.
They pulled out the medical beds, and they hung partition walls, and they just relit it, and they shot everything pretty close, and they brought in some bench seating for the bar patrons to sit at. But that set is actually the Dr. McCoy's medical bay from Motion Picture in
I
Trek
hear
3.
your claim to fame is Max is in a Star Trek movie, standing next to Scotty, wearing an engineering
Yes.
uniform.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I had worked on Star Trek: The Next Generation as an extra during the 4th and the 5th seasons. I started in the middle of the 4th season. First episode I did was called The Nth Degree. It's where Barclay joins with the Enterprise D's computer after having been infected by an alien probe. They basically the alien probe was not evil. They weren't antagonistic. They were just trying to give the Enterprise D a way of forming a sort of like warp tunnel to come visit the aliens who had sent out this probe. They don't leave their home. They invite others to come visit them, and that's how they learn about other people. And I worked on Next Gen all the way to the middle of the 5th season, and the last episode I did was called The Game. Is where the crew becomes addicted to a sort of like, I don't know, I call it virtual reality game that they put on these headsets, and they can see these things because it's being projected directly.
Is Ashley Judd in that episode? Yeah.
Yes. Where she and Wesley's kind of like strike up a friendship and whatnot. And then during the hiatus between season 4 and 5, that's when they filmed Star Trek 6. They redressed the sets for Next Generation to look more like the way they did during the Star Trek Classic Trek movie period. And since I was already working on the show as an extra, the gentleman at Central Casting, who was taking care of all of us who were working on Next Gen as extras, he was just like, you know what? You guys are already used with the way the production works. You know where the sets are. You know how wardrobe works. I'm just going to shift all of you working from Star Trek 6, Next Generation to working on Star Trek 6. So that's how that happened. And so I had to go in for another wardrobe fitting. They put me in one of the white radiation jumpsuits that were originally made for Motion Picture and then reused in all the other movies. And just by complete sheer coincidence, the first half of the day, you have to understand things are shot really, really quickly and out of sequence. They'll film many, many things that are in one set with one setup, which may not be in the same timeline of the movie. It might be at the beginning of the movie, then another shot be reused near the end of the movie, and so on and so forth. So the first half of the day, I hadn't gotten called by any of the assistant directors to be used in any of the scenes. We went to lunch. I got to sit with a bunch of the other extras, and I saw DeForest Kelley and Mark Leonard come in to visit all of the extras, say hi, which is something really nice. They didn't have to do that. They could have just gone off to their trailers and just hung out, but they wanted to come say hi and whatnot. And then we went back from the lunch, and then I got called by the second assistant director. That is the person on set who's in charge of taking care of all the extras, the background actors, because of course the director himself was too busy taking care of everything else. And she came and called, and she goes, okay, I want you, and you, come with me. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. We walk onto the engineering set. It's the engineering set from Next Gen. They didn't do a lot to redress it because that would have been too expensive, especially changing out the warp core. So anyways, they positioned us behind the clear plexiglass wall in that area beyond the warp core. It's kind of like that little area I call like Geordie's office space, And at first I'm like, well, damn, I'm never going to get seen back here because I'm on the other side of the plexiglass wall, and the camera's sitting out there on the other side right next to the warp core. But I took the spot that I had been given. What they do is they'll take some tape, sometimes colored, sometimes not, depending on what's going on. They'll put X's on the floor telling us where they want us to stand. All of ours, of the other extras, the tape was white. There was one set of marks that were right next to me that were red. I thought, well, that's kind of odd. I wonder what's going on. So as they got ready to shoot and rehearse, here, walking on from the other side, comes Jimmy Doohan. And I'm like, oh my God. It's like one of my all-time favorite classic Trek actors. I've always liked his portrayal of Scotty. That's kind of the reason why I liked building stuff, because I liked Scotty's ingenuity of suddenly having to come up with something and solve some sort of problem to get the, crew out of danger. And here I'm getting to stand right next to like one of my favorite characters. And of course, again, on set, you have to be a professional. You can't fanboy, you can't squee, you can't do anything. And you certainly do not ask for an autograph or a photo. One, cameras are forbidden. Personal cameras are forbidden on set. It's obviously they have set photographers there, and that's their purpose, is to be there and take photographs. But you, as an extra, are forbidden. And actually, most of the crew, they are forbidden from bringing their own personal cameras or whipping out their cell phone to take a picture or to ask for a picture. So it was like everything I could do to hold that little bit of my fanboy in, and I have to be a professional. And they go and they shoot the shot, and there's this big, long master shot where they wheel the camera in first before they start rehearsing, and they put the camera right in front of me and Jimmy Doohan. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. And then they start the shot by turning the camera around so it's looking through the plexiglass wall at the warp core. It's following one extra who's, again, dressed in one of the radiation jumpsuits, and he's carrying some tubing slung over his shoulder. They follow him through the shot. They keep tracking around, and then they come upon the rest of us extras, and they go from person to person to person. And then finally, the shot comes and settles on me for a moment, and then it starts moving away to end up on Jimmy Doohan, and that's the end of the shot. We did that shot 13 times. You would think
it because somebody kept messing it up, or was it just because they didn't get what they wanted?
No, it's because somebody kept messing it up. But really though, it wasn't his fault. The guy that was standing next to me was a tall, lanky Indian fellow, East, Asia Indian fellow, and I recognized him. He's one of the other extras from Next Gen. You would many times see him working in the medical department as one of Dr. Crusher's assistants. Anyways, he had been told by Nick Myers, the director, to lean back, hold the railing of the console that was behind him, and keep his head tilted down. And as the camera would come past him, they wanted him to lift his head and keep looking as if he was looking up, because it's during the scene where the Enterprise is being attacked by the cloaked bird of prey that can fire while its shields are up. And so he's supposed to be looking up, and they're doing kind of a run silent, run deep submarine bit. They want everybody nervous and looking up as if you could see or hear this, submarine under it, getting ready to attack us. And because they weren't giving him, he couldn't see when the camera was going to pass by. He couldn't quite get the timing right to lift his head while he was in full view of the camera. And finally, on the 13th take, Nick Myers realized what was going on. And he said, you know what? We're not shooting this with sound anyway. I'll give you a verbal cue. I'll tell you, lift your head.
That would make sense.
Right. And that's what they did. And then the shot was fine. But it was really cool because they were going from extra to extra. And we ended up being seen on screen like from mid chest up. So it's a big
close up. There's a picture of you on the the wiki, Star Trek wiki.
Was that that unique? Because would you ever have done 13 takes in something and when they're filming Next Gen?
Well, obviously no. TV, you get, you're lucky if you get 3 chances to get it right. But it's a big feature film. They have a lot more time than a TV series. Think about it this way. They spent maybe 2 weeks maximum shooting an episode of Next Gen.
Yeah.
Star Trek 6, they had 2 months to film the whole movie.
Yep.
So
I found it interesting, and I'll tell you why I'm nerding out over this. So Jimmy Doohan's mark, I used to be a camera assistant. So his mark was red, which makes sense because he wore a red shirt. Now, I was
it's also because he's a principal as compared to the rest of us who were just extras.
When I was a camera assistant, I was the guy who put the marks on the floor.
Oh,
and
cool.
we'd always ask the leads what color they wanted. And I'm just wondering, is Kirk yellow?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was wondering, is there a gold mark and a blue mark?
And Scotty red? That would make sense to me.
That would be awesome.
Well, I never got to do any of the scenes where I saw Kirk or McCoy or any of the others.
Because you never used. I guarantee Bill Shatner would not let anyone else use his color tape. That's how leads tend to be. I bet.
Yeah. I take that back. I did work. I only worked on Star Trek VI for 2 days. One day I was the engineering, ensign, and then the other day I was a Klingon in the big Klingon courtroom scene.
Oh, wow.
But I'm wearing one of those big, heavy rubber over the head masks. You can't tell me from anybody else.
Yeah. That's great.
And the close up was so big because Max at this point, Max is in LA, I'm in San Diego. We see it. I'm like, that guy looks just like Max.
Oh, that's so funny.
Max builds props. Max isn't in movies. He's building props. That's not Max. And we went back and forth over coffee whether that was Max or not Max. Because it looked just like
funny.
him.
So when you were doing extra work, were you all at the same time building props or?
No. The reason why I went to do the extra work is really because I was between gigs. I had been working for one company and then that went away. And then I was between gigs and I happened to run into an old friend of mine named Richard Arnold. Richard was Mr. Roddenberry's personal assistant, as well as he was working on Next Generation as both the Star Trek archivist, as well as it was also Richard's job, as well as taking care of all of the things Mr. Roddenberry needed done, was to read the scripts of the Next Gen episodes to make sure they weren't going to contradict something that happened in the past, in a past Star Trek movie or episode. And so they could make sure that history and canon was, correct and being followed, as well as giving little hints like, well, we wouldn't say this, in that episode, we would say this instead, so making little corrections to make sure that the verbiage was correct to, the Star Trek lineage and such. But yeah, and Richard, I said to him, I was looking for work. And he said, well, you might be able to get on Next Gen as an extra, but I can tell you how, but that's all I can do. I can't do any other help. You're going to have to go to Central. You're going to have to let them take pictures of you. Then you can tell them you want them submitted to Star Trek. And at that point, I can make a recommendation whether you should be seen or not. But then everything else is still up to the decision of other people. And so I got through all that. It took about 2 weeks to get through all that. And my final thing to becoming an extra was literally, do we have a uniform that will fit him? Because if not, we're not making anything custom for an extra.
That's how it works a lot of times, right? Yeah. I mean, you fit the costume, you get the gig.
Especially if it's a background person, your background. They already know that you obviously understand how to act and how to behave in front of the camera. That's not what's important then. What's important is, do we have something that'll fit this person? If not, there's 101 other people we can find that.
That's how Jeremy Bullock got Boba Fett, because he fit the
exactly. Yeah, the other guy that was supposed to do it canceled, and Jeremy's agent called him up. He said, "Hey, there's this little bit in this new Star Wars movie. You want to do it?" I knew Jeremy. We were friends and everything. Not like strong friends, but I mean, I would see him at conventions, and he was always take a moment to say hi, and he was always really nice to me and everything. So, and I
didn't know him, but I met him a few times, and he was always wonderful at conventions.
Yeah, he was.
That's a perfect place to transition here. We talked about Greg Jien a little bit and his auction a couple of weeks ago, and apparently I made some mistakes that luckily were pointed out and corrected by someone on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Yes, somebody who listened to the show pointed out the
that's what happens when you're a tangent fan that knows Greg and you repeat things that other people have told you that are wrong. So we thought we'd bring someone on who really knew Greg very well and that's Max. Was a friend of Greg Jien's. And let's start with Max. How did Greg help you get started in the business?
Well, early on in my fandom, of course, I was making my own model kits and painting them up and doing what I thought was correct and reading everything I could voraciously out of like American Cinematographer and Starlog and Cinefantastique about model making and all that sort of thing. And I had seen Greg Jien's names several times. And so I was reading all this stuff where this guy's name, Greg Jien, kept coming up, and how he had worked on, Flesh Gordon and making all these cool spaceship models and the castle for the bad guy and all these other things that Greg had done and other things. And I happened to go to a convention. I think it was one of the small Crawford cons. Do you remember those that we called them? They were smaller conventions. The fellow, he and his wife would have them at this one hotel in Fullerton, California, and then the other ones he'd like have one in the fall and he'd have one in the spring. And the other ones in the spring, he would hold them at this smaller hotel near LAX that was right around the corner from the Marriott Hotel. Anyways, I had taken a Millennium Falcon kit, the standard model kit that was out, and I did some more detailing and a real nice paint job and weather to it. I took it to the art show and I entered it into the art show, and lo and behold, I just happened to go into the room where the art show was being held, and there's Greg Jien. I recognized him from seeing his picture in magazines. I'm a rather precocious kid, so I walked up to him and I explained who I was and that I knew who he was and blah, 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 blah. And I pointed at my piece, the Falcon I had done, and I asked him, look, I seriously want to do what you do. I want to work in the film business and everything. And I said, look, I don't care if it's going to hurt my feelings or what, but I want you to tell me the truth. What do you think of my work? What do you think I could improve it to make it better? And do you think I have enough talent to work in the business?
And how old were you at this point?
17.
Okay.
Maybe 17, 18, I think. And he looked it over and he, gave it a really good eye. I picked it up so he could hold it because, of course, it was mine. He wasn't going to pick it up unless somebody else did. And he took it from me and looked it over, and everything is, it's really nice. You don't have any obvious glue marks showing. There's no fingerprints that, because, and everything. He said the only thing, he said, I like the color values you use. It's very realistic. The only thing he said is that your weathering is too big. It's out of scale. The weathering needs to be a little bit more subdued to make it look realistic. You have to remember what scale this thing is and how big would this really be if it was blown up full size. Mm-hmm. Your weathering is nice, but it's too big. It's too over the top for the scale that this model is. And that was really it. And he said, and if you ever actually plan on trying to work in the business, though, you're going to have to move because nobody's going to hire you when you live 60 miles away. I grew up in a little city here in Southern California called Corona, which is like 15 miles, 20 miles east of Anaheim, which is still a good 50, 55 miles away from Hollywood and where most of the effects shops were at the time. And he said, but you know what? If you ever end up moving to LA and want to work in the business, give me a call. And he gave me a card.
Nice.
And that's how I first met Greg. And then years later, when I eventually did move to LA, about I was 17, probably by the time about like 84 is when I moved to Los Angeles. I had gotten a job working for a plastics company that made plastic signage and everything because I have a bachelor's of arts degree in industrial plastics, involving the chemistry of plastics as well as materials and knowledge and everything. Cool. Anyways, so I gave Greg a call and he, I went to go visit his shop. His old shop used to be in Mar Vista, which is an area that is south of Venice and it is
down there. Everyone's now in Burbank, right?
yeah. But yeah, Mar Vista is south of Venice and it's north of Marina del Rey, and it's a little inland.
On Glencoe Drive, right?
Yep,
Yep.
Glencoe
place?
And Glencoe has a really interesting history as far as the name of a street, because right across the street from it was the old Revell plastic model kit company was on Glencoe. And so literally Revell Models was across the street from where Greg's shop was. And Greg would go over there, and he got really friendly with the people over there that run the shop and everything. And when you're doing injection molding, sometimes you do have rejects, where the plastic didn't fill all of the cavities in the mold. It's what they call a short shot. Usually happens when you're first doing your run, because the molds are still maybe a little cold, or the material's a little cold, whatever. You have a part that comes out and it's not quite good enough to put in a box to sell. Greg would go over there and they'd give all those short shots to Greg, because there'd still be lots of other model kit parts that were really usable, but you might have one or two that are fucked up and they can't sell that. And that's where Greg would get a lot of his model kit parts that were just meant for, being put on models for decoration
and stuff. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know what's also cool? I'm going to jump in and do a commercial.
Go ahead.
Fanboy Collectibles. Sorry to jump in, but we got to do it because we always put Troy at the end. We did put Troy at the end last time, and we won't do that again. But anyway, check them out. In stock, Iron Studios, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Iron Man statues. Those look awesome. I know you guys were talking about Hot Toys Chopper. Ahsoka's out, so Hot Toys Chopper is up for pre-order. Sideshow and Hot Toys and Pops and everything you need. Maybe model kits. I don't know. Does he do Bandai stuff? He might.
I don't think he does.
You never know. But anyway, check those guys out. FanboyCollectibles.com. Check them out at their store in Newtown, Connecticut. Tell them the Regular Joe sent you. Sorry, I had to throw it in there anyway.
That's okay. Well, I was just about to say, with all the sort of hype around the auction and everything, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts talking about Greg, and a lot of people have been interviewed that knew him and that worked with him. And it's amazing how many of them have a similar or almost exact same story as the one that you just shared, Max. He seemed, from everything I've heard in all these interviews, he seemed very willing to invite people down, give people opportunities to work, and really give people an entrance into the business, which is amazing, because not everybody would have done that.
No, that's very true. I remember that first time of going over to visit Greg's shop, and it was just like, to me, as a big fan of all these movies and TV shows and whatnot, it was like, that moment where Willy Wonka opens the door to the Candyland where they would get on the boats. That's how it struck me. It was like, oh my God, everything I could ever want is in here. Over in one corner, there is the full-size, screen-used stunt robot to Lost in Space. Over there in the other corner, there's the 4-foot miniature of the Jupiter 2 sitting on its edge. Over there's this big-ass model of the Proteus from, Fantastic Voyage. Over there, sitting on his windowsill in his office, there's a freaking model of the Icarus from Planet of the Apes, So, yeah, it was like walking into, like, Willy Wonka's shop for me.
I was just going to ask you how much of what was in his shop was his collection versus things he was working on, but it sounds like it was a mixture of both.
It really was. And, I never went to go visit Greg's home because Greg was a very private guy, and he was actually, you might think this is odd, but he was actually a very shy person. And so I never visited Greg's house, but hearing him talk about it and talking with my other friends, I was amazed to know that, Greg's house was packed full of his collection, and he had an aunt who had lived right next door to him, and his two aunts, when they passed away, Greg inherited their house. Well, since it was right next door and the house was paid for, he just used the house as more storage, as well as Greg had a couple of big storage facilities. So this is why Greg has such a huge collection. He was there at the right time, way back in the 70s, when MGM and so many of the other studios were having these big auctions to clear out their prop and storage warehouses. Back in the late 70s, MGM really hit upon hard times, and they sold off the back lot. They sold so much of the stuff that was sitting in storage in their wardrobe and prop and other assorted departments because they needed the money. Same thing happened to 20th. 20th had, two big, huge budget movies that just didn't make the money that they expected them to. One being Hello, Dolly, and the other one being Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. Both of them cost huge amounts of money, and both of them did not make the money that they expected them to. So they did the same thing. They sold off their giant, massive backlot. 20th had a backlot that was probably at least, I want to say about three-quarters of a mile square piece of land. It went all the way from Santa Monica Boulevard to the north, Avenue of the Stars to the east, all the way down to Pico Boulevard to the south. And they had just had this massive backlot. They sold it when they struck on hard times, and now there's a giant shopping center and housing and condominiums on that piece of land.
I stay there when I'm in LA. Right
Yeah.
on, right. There's
Yeah,
still
right
the
there on the
Fox has got a
avenue.
little
Yeah,
studio
they still have some of it.
Yeah.
They kept some of it. A large portion of the area that was used for New York City in Hello, Dolly is still there. It's not as lavish looking as it was when it was made into Hello, Dolly, and it's been dressed down and everything. But yeah, they still have a fairly sizable lot there. So they still have sound stages there. And such, but it's not the grand place it once was. Same as MGM. MGM's backlot used to go all the way south down to Jefferson Boulevard and to Overland Boulevard to the west, and that's a huge piece of land. If you've ever seen MGM's version of Showboat, they had a freaking river on their backlot. That movie, Walt Disney had seen that movie, and that's what inspired him wanting to have the rivers of America at Disneyland. He wanted his park to have that giant paddle wheeler going around the river, and he was inspired from having seen that movie from MGM. So yeah, Greg was at the right.
Before we get too deep into it today. Oh, sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
Before we get too deep, I definitely want you to tell the story of Worldcon and the Star Trek exhibit in Greg's stuff.
Oh, of course.
That was a pivotal point in my Star Trek geekdom when you walked me through that prop display.
And so much of that display is what's in this catalog, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Well, this happened leading up to the 40th anniversary of Star Trek, and I had some friends of mine with LOSFUS, and they are the Los Angeles Science Fiction and Fantasy Organization. They're the people who put on Worldcon when Worldcon comes to Los Angeles. LOSFUS is probably the oldest science fiction club in the world. They've been around since the 1930s. And anyways, I happened to be hanging out with a couple of friends of mine who were associated with it, and I think Laura Trimble and maybe Bija were there. I can't remember precisely. And I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if they would do like a big, the anniversary of Star Trek is going to be the same year as Worldcon when it comes to Los Angeles. Wouldn't it be kind of cool and only appropriate, since this is Hollywood, to have some sort of a anniversary exhibit for it? And they're like, that sounds like a great idea. You're in charge. And I suddenly realized, I shouldn't have opened my mouth. And so, yeah, I took it upon myself to organize this thing. And the first person I reached out to was Greg, of course, because I knew what sort of a huge collection he had I mean, and Greg he pulled out all the stops. He brought down at his own expense. He even brought his own mannequins and his own display cases that were lockable. And I was given the only key to get into those display cases for the whole run of the convention. And
so while he was shy and sometimes didn't talk about stuff, he seemed to be happy to have other people see it when there was the right opportunity.
Oh, definitely. One of my other times of going to visit Greg, I had mentioned to him, hey, because I knew that Greg had one of the really super nice condition hero pistol phasers from Classic Trek. And he brought it out and he let me photograph it and let me measure it. Because I just wanted to make one for myself. I didn't want to be making them for other people. And Greg knew that. I just wanted to make one for myself. And he let me handle it. He let me disassemble it. He let me take the phaser one apart and look inside it, see how its mechanisms worked.
And that's on page 275 of the catalog. No, I don't know if that's the page.
Well, I haven't gotten my copy yet. I ordered mine last week and I'm still waiting. I'm waiting to get it though.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. One of my friends got it and he said it's as big as a phone book. For all you kids out there, phone books were things made out of paper, and you would open them up, and instead of reading stories, it would have giant listings of everybody's phone number alphabetically by name. There you go, kids.
I explain this to I teach, and I explain this to my middle school students at one point, and they sit because they just completely have no idea this, and they were like, "Isn't that like a huge invasion of privacy? You're giving everybody's address," and I'm like, "Yeah, you just don't get this."
It's called the internet. You guys have that in worse.
Oh yeah, no, but I'm saying that's the thing. It's like they just they'll surrender any piece of information. But the idea of a book showing up with people's addresses in it was just no, you can't do that.
Funny.
Yeah, but it's like you do the exact same thing. I mean, people can get your phone number and address on the internet from anywhere in the world, not just if you happen to live in that city.
Yeah.
And even back then, you were given the option to opt out and not be in the phone book. So you don't have that option with the internet nowadays, do you?
You do not.
No.
Okay, back to Worldcon. I want to say so he brought all this stuff at his own expense. Awesome.
He brought all of this stuff down. He put forth all his own effort, brought his own display cases, brought his own mannequins, and then I dressed all the mannequins up, and then I put all the props out on display, and I asked for his approval to make sure, okay, is this the way you like it? Do you like this? Do you like that? He's like, yeah, that's all great. That's all fine. Looks great. And then I locked everything up, and I was the only person allowed that key during the whole weekend to be able to get into the stuff. He even, I don't know where the heck Greg got it. He even had one of the gold mesh suspended animation suits from Space Seed. It was one of the female bodies. I don't know, but I know, I remember he brought it and let me put it up on a mannequin.
It was in a previous auction, I think. I think I've seen that. The thing that I didn't know was that my friend Max had put this together. So I'm standing behind the ropes with my camera trying to take pictures of stuff. Max comes by and goes, "Oh, you want to see it?" Opens the rope and lets me in. I'm like, "Max, does security know you're doing this?"
So funny.
I says, "Oh, it's my friend Greg's stuff. Don't worry about it." And we went around. He's like, "See, here's the tricorder," and there was the leather covered tricorder was there. I remember that very clearly.
Yeah.
And hanging on an original Spock costume. It's like, ugh.
I know. I very carefully, I laid the costumes out and I took pictures myself, and I would flip the seam edges over to see how things were done and took pictures of it. That's the only time I think Greg ever brought, it was to me, that was the holy grail of all of the costumes he brought out. He had Mark Leonard's one-of-a-kind Romulan commander's outfit from Balance of Terror. And I will tell you, I have never seen that fabric, that red and black triangle checkered fabric. I have never seen that anywhere ever in my whole life. And that's one of those weird things because, I like to make costumes and I'm always looking for that sort of stuff, and so I always have my eyes off that. Same thing with the base fabric that they used for the Romulans' pants, it was just the freakingest, weirdest stuff. I mean, Bill Tice was so incredibly inventive to like take these different weird things and find ways of putting it all together and just making it look incredible.
Yeah, Max and Fabrics. I got this text from Max going, Brian, I found the gray stripe for the Sandman costume. I found the fabric that's the right fabric for the gray stripe of the Sandman costume. Fabric. It was hard because it's gray with a black speckle. It's
is it
really tough. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just solid gray. It's like gym suit sweatpants fabric.
Yeah.
But there's like a really tiny black speckling on it. So it's gray and white speckles, but then there's also a black speckling on it. And I found it and I bought a whole bunch of it. I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do.
That's what's so cool about LA. You find this stuff that could be there for 30 years in the same places. By the way, the Space Seed is in this one.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
So I've got a question. He brought all this stuff to you. Did you get the sense that was he treating it with kid gloves almost like it was these like crazy valuable items, or was it more just like, this is my stuff? I'll tell you why I'm asking the question, because I heard an interview recently with about the Stormtrooper armor that he has that's in this auction as well, that he had in a plastic garbage bag since it was given to him back in the 70s. And they're saying that the reason it's in as good condition as it's in is because it didn't see sunlight for 40 years because it was in a black garbage bag. But it just made me think, like, was he like taking care of this stuff the way like collectors today that collect costumes and props do? Or was it more like, this is just my stuff and it's, I've just got it? And it's just kind of like, I'm just curious because it sounds like he had so much stuff, and in some cases he might not even have known everything that he had because he had so much stuff.
I would have to say it was the second. It wasn't about, I'm preserving this by keeping in a black bag. It's like, no, it was just because the garbage bag just happened to be black, and it just happens that it serves the purpose of keeping it out of sunlight. But also, it was also probably sitting in storage. And it was also, so one, it was in a black plastic bag. Two, it was being kept in storage. Three, it was being kept in the dark. So it was just happenstance that it was being taken really well care of.
Right.
He wasn't doing it on purpose. The same way, like you said, when he brought all these costumes and props to me, he just treated it like, this is my stuff. Treat it nicely, but you didn't get the impression where he was opening up these boxes and bringing stuff off, and there was this golden light emanating from the box.
He wasn't precious about it.
Yeah, and wearing white gloves
and everything. You're not opening the Ark of the Covenant and pulling out a tricorder.
Yeah. He let Max dress the mannequins, right? So that tells you there that he wasn't.
That in and of itself is amazing. Like, you're literally putting Kirk, Shatner and Nimoy's costumes on stuff that are going to go for $50,000 in a week
at some point. Eventually. And I was very careful about it. When I laid them on the floor, I made sure that the floor was clean because I wasn't going to lay them down on a floor that hadn't been swept. And he brought two Kirks. He brought a standard first season Kirk. It was velour. And then he also brought a green wraparound of Kirk's, which was made out of this really unusual wool. That green wraparound.
It looks wool.
Yeah, it's some
Did it
sort
stretch?
of
No, just kidding.
no, it did actually just a little bit, but it's what they call like a summer weight wool.
Yeah,
and that obviously that color is not something a man would be wearing. He probably bought the fabric, and that fabric was intended on making like a woman's summer weight outfit, like a nice jacket and skirt.
I've
That's
read
Like
an
the sort
article.
of thing you might see Tippi Hedren wearing.
Yeah.
But obviously that kind of a color is not something you would have put a man in back in the 60s.
That was the one from, because last night, what episode? Like the fourth episode was on, the one where Kirk becomes two people.
Yeah, I watched it
yes,
last night.
Enemy Within.
Enemy Within. I watched it last night.
I watched it last night too.
Yeah.
There it is.
And
there it is. And
it's where the braid is up on the shoulders instead of on the sleeves.
And that's material looks fuzzy. And the only reason they did that was because they wanted one Kirk to be in the gold and the other to be in something else.
And he does wear the green wraparound a couple other times though during the run of the series. But then they changed it, and they put the braid down on the sleeves instead of at the shoulders.
And I don't think I ever noticed before last night when I watched it. I don't think I ever really picked up on how almost brutal that scene was when he almost rapes.
I mean,
that was rough with her.
It's really rough. I was watching it last night, kind of horrified.
That is amazingly. I'm amazed they got that on TV for the 60s.
Yeah.
But and then he brought me 2 McCoys, a standard first season McCoy velour, and then he brought me one of the surgeon's
short sleeve one,
the short sleeve one with the wide rounded collar, and that was that material that McCoy surgeon smock that was made out of the same sateen fabric that they made the dress uniforms out of.
Oh, I always felt like that was the velour turned inside out.
No, because the velour turned on inside out is not shiny.
Oh, really?
Like that doctor smock. And
was
even
it a cotton velour or was it more like a polyester velour?
Yeah, they didn't have polyester velour back in the 60s. It was only cotton velour, and that was the downfall of it. Every single time you'd wash them or dry clean them, they'd shrink a little bit. And so by the time in the end of the first season, they had to replace them again, and it got to be expensive. And that's why for the third season, they went with the polyester, pure polyester, because it didn't shrink at all. And it was very, very durable. I have my third season Star Trek uniform is made out of that polyester. A good friend of mine, Joe Koresman, he found he had worked at Western Costume, and one of his jobs was to go and clean the racks, as they called them. And many of the racks just had pieces of fabric thrown over them to keep the dust off the costumes underneath. Well, he went up in some, bizarre place that people didn't venture to go do some cleaning through there. And he found a great big, huge piece of that third season green avocado polyester being used as a dust rag covering a bunch of costumes on a rack.
That's awesome.
And so during lunchtime, he went out to the store and he bought some nice cotton sheets and he replaced it and he took that green piece of fabric home.
That's awesome. He makes repros. I know he makes like the belts and stuff. He's on a Facebook group I'm in.
Yeah, Joe does some of the best classic Trek repo work I've ever seen. The braid, the patches, the fabric. He's really, really sincere in wanting to make sure they be as best as possible. And so he brought one Spock. He had the Mark Leonard from Balance of Terror, the Romulan Commanders. He had a Nurse Chapel, the construction of the Nurse Chapel was different than any other woman's uniform, but yet it was her uniform that they used when Lincoln Enterprises, the company that Majel Barrett formed to sell merchandise and memorabilia to help Gene and Majel survive during the 70s after the show had been canceled, they used her costume to be the pattern to what they sold to the fans, which is why back in the 70s, that's all you had available, because I don't know how or where, but Gene was able to keep one of her costumes. They took a pattern off of it, and that's the pattern.
Oh, it had a lot more seams in it.
More panels.
It had all these seams that radiated away from the chest insignia.
Yeah.
And that's what made her uniform different than anybody else's.
I'm going to guess Gene brought that one home one night so that they could role play in the bedroom.
I don't think it was so much that. I think he was just thinking about it that I can get my hands on this easily and it's worth money sometime down the line. And her costume was put together differently as well, since it didn't have that black.
It did have the here it is. It had the gray,
it wasn't gray. It was the same color. It was the same color as the rest of it.
You could see the
collar
seams.
though had snaps. The collar had snaps to remove the collar because there was a thin piece of upholstery foam in it to give it more body, so the collar would stand up but yet still be flexible, and it couldn't be dry cleaned because of that. So the collar was made, and it had snaps on it in key points to keep it attached to the rest of the dress.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's weird that hers is different.
Yeah.
I think that was a remake from the pilot, one of the pilot outfits?
No, I think what it was is, truthfully, I think that they thought if they were going to go on for a fourth season, they were going to make all the ladies' uniforms like that.
I was wondering if it's more like a surgical smock looking thing, maybe.
I'm not really sure about that. I tend to think it was more of a case that if they had gone for a fourth season, they were going to make them different, you know. But it was amazing. He brought one of all of the other characters' costumes. There was one Chekhov, there was one Sulu, there was one Uhura, and they were, except for the Chekhov, they were all first season outfits. Chekhov's was the only one that was a second or third.
In the catalog, there's a prototype for the female uniform from Phase 2, and it is that same.
Yeah,
it's that same.
You see that in the little test videos released. Ilya's wearing it.
of Ilya wearing it. Persis Kambata wearing it. Yeah.
So this is by far sounds like a once in a lifetime display that was put on. Yeah. Are there pictures of this? Or I mean,
I took a bunch of pictures. There's some other people who were there who took lots of pictures. But yes, it really was.
This is like what, 2006?
My memory is bad about that. Whatever year was the 40th anniversary of Classic
So it
Trek.
came on in 66. So had to be 2006, I guess.
Yeah. But but it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun.
That's amazing.
My friends over at HMS Creative Productions, which was owned by Mike Moore and Steve Horsch. Steve, God bless his soul, has passed away. Yeah. But Mike and Steve were also they had a license to make captain's chairs, full size working captain's chairs. And so I brought one of their captain's chairs down there to be put on display as well, amongst all the other Classic Trek stuff. Wow. And Mike and I were friends with the people at Master Replicas, and they had heard about my exhibit I was putting on, and they asked me if I would be willing to do them a favor, because one of their big ticket items that they were going to be putting out was that 3-foot model of the Enterprise that they were going to be putting out. And they asked me, Max, would you put one of our prototypes on display in your exhibit? Because that's our key demographic right there. All these people who would love to buy our model, we hope will buy the model, would be fans of Classic Trek. I said, well, yeah, I'd be willing to do so. So they brought over a prototype to my home, and then I took it with me and I set it up. I put it in the captain's chair also, because that way nobody could sit in the chair.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, but boy, that exhibit was something.
Something else.
Even myself, I was so blown away at getting to hold all these things and trying to decide where to put them. And some of the stuff that I brought was stuff that I got, again, from my buddies Mike Moore and Steve Horsch, from all the stuff that they had worked on Next Gen and Deep Space Nine and Voyager and whatever else had been out at the time, which were originals from those shows, as well as the vast amount of stuff that Greg brought me from his Classic Trek collection. So I think about, wow, if Greg had this much stuff just from Classic Trek, that really tells you how much Greg loved classic Trek and all the other Treks as well, but especially classic Trek. And, again, seeing that, all of that stuff that Greg had from just that was like 0.01 of Greg's collection, it seems, after it's all said and done. There's so much stuff that I've seen come out that I didn't know that Greg had.
Did you know he had this Logan's Run stuff, the flame gun and the follower and the costume? I had no idea.
Yes, I did.
You did know? Okay.
Yeah, because he told me he like me had loved Logan's Run. But yeah, just to give you guys a quick rundown, I was really lucky. When I was 16 years old, my teacher at school asked me what I wanted to do for a living. I said I love doing special effects, models, and props and stuff. I'd love to do something like that. I gave him a list of movies I really liked, and 2001 was on the list. He, without telling me, he calls up the head of MGM special effects department. This was in 76. And the guy who was the head of the effects department, Glenn Robinson, had just finished doing Logan's Run earlier in the year. They still had all the sets up and everything. And so he sets up an appointment, and me and two of my friends, 2 days after Christmas in 76, got to go to MGM Studios and tour all of the sets that were still up from Logan's Run. I got to walk through Logan's apartment, through the Ice Cave set, through the New You set. The day I was there, they were disassembling the carousel set, the giant crystal in the center of the floor of the set. You could still see where the carpet was burned from where they exploded the life
really?
clock
Wow.
at the end of the filming. And they had already disassembled 80% of the giant miniature city. And when I say giant, I'm not kidding. That city miniature sat on a tabletop that was 80 feet square. It filled a sound stage, and they had a giant curved hand-painted cyclorama to extend the rest of the miniature to make it look
really
fast.
Wow. I didn't know it was that big.
That's crazy.
It's a really pity though, because of the way they filmed it though. The model comes off looking like a model.
Yeah. It's a shame.
We all love that movie. But
to give you a sense of scale, the Sandman control tower, I saw it being taken off the platform and being wheeled away to go put it into storage. The Sandman control tower model was 6 feet tall.
Really? Where's all that stuff now? Jeez.
Who knows?
In a landfill.
The last time I saw it,
under Century City.
It was being, MGM, it was being taken and put into storage. Because Glenn Robinson, he took me to storage, and I saw a bunch of the other buildings up high that was like in the third floor of some building being put away in storage. They weren't even putting them in boxes. They were just being put nicely on the floor and gathered together, and then they were throwing sheets over them.
They're throwing Star Trek uniform sheets.
Do you have any sense? Were they thinking sequel, or we know they ended up doing a TV show, but why were they saving?
They actually were. I asked him, what are they going to do now with tearing down all the sets? He said, well, they're not sure if they want to do a sequel or if they want to do something else like a TV show. But they figure either way, they have plenty of stock footage to use of the carousel. They don't need to have that again. There's plenty of stock footage that they shot that never saw the light of day. They can always reuse. A really cute little trick they did. All of the shots of them flying upwards towards the white crystal to try and reach the white crystal so they'll be renewed. They're not going upwards. They actually put the camera way up at the top of the soundstage, and they replaced the small red crystal that was in the center of the big red crystal. They covered everything in black fabric. They replaced the small red crystal with a white one, and they were filming all of the carousel flyers being lowered to the ground, looking like they're going towards the white crystal, but they're not. But because, of course, cameras don't have any sense of up and down. They're not like us. And so when they shot it at just the right angle, looking down, so it would look like everybody's flying up, but they're actually being lowered.
Well, that's interesting. probably easier to
Scott
do.
and I went to the Fort Worth Water Gardens, and that was the closest we've gotten to being on a Logan's Run set. But at least we were there.
I'm so glad it is still there because the place where they filmed the Great Hall and where they filmed Arcade, they're both gone.
Yeah,
They
that
were
was
both
the
in
old
same building.
like
it was the Dallas Apparel Mart.
Apparel Mart. Yeah,
Yeah, we were going to try to go there when we were there,
but it was closed. Yeah,
it was already closed.
Yeah.
Apparently,
and it was
Salmon
closed to
headquarters
the
is in
public.
danger now too. Salmon headquarters may be torn down as well.
Oh no! And at that time, it was the Zale Jewelry, Zale Diamond Company, their international headquarters there in Texas. Was it Fort Worth or Dallas? I can't remember. The Fort Worth
Water Gardens are in
Dallas
Fort Worth.
Yeah, but I mean the two cities are very close to each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was the Zale Corporation's international headquarters at the time.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a school trip.
Yeah, right.
Now, Max, I don't remember if we talked about this offline or if I saw you post this somewhere that you had seen or knew that Greg had that X-wing before this whole thing exploded.
I had heard about it. I had never seen it. I knew that Greg had it, but I'd never seen it. I mean, 'cause, again, Greg was such a private guy. I didn't want to bother him about it. He probably got bothered by every freaking fanboy that would ever find out he had anything. Oh, I would
never
see it.
And he had horror stories of loaning things out that never came back, and
Yeah.
Lost in Space laser pistols he saw show up in auctions that he had loaned. Just
God.
horror stories about
And that sort of
stuff.
stuff just bothers the hell out of me. It's like, you know what? This kind-hearted person loaned you something, and then you betrayed that trust out of your selfishness and your own selfish desires to make a fast buck.
Yeah, his
off
Lost in
of it.
Space robot, same thing. He loaned it to someone, and they
Yep.
sold it to somebody in Japan. They
Yep.
went all the way to
Yep.
Japan.
Yep. And then he found out,
Yeah.
and he threatened to sue the person in Japan who bought it. And they were like, no, we don't want any trouble. And so they sent it back, but Greg had to pay for the shipping.
Right. They ship it back from Japan.
Well, and I've heard in a lot of these interviews and articles I've been reading, they mention, they never go into detail, but they mention that he had been burned a few times, and that's
quite
part
a few
of why
times.
he was so private. So this isn't surprising to me to hear this, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
So
it's very unfortunate.
You went to his shop when you moved to LA. Did you work with him, or did he help you get started? Or
I did some work with him early on. The TV series V was on the air at the time, and he said, "Here, I want you to go ahead and make these little tiny V shuttles for me." He already had a mold. I didn't have to make the pattern master or anything like that. He already had the object made. He already had silicone molds made, and he knew I already was well versed in doing castings and cleanup and painting and everything. So he said, "I want you to make 50 of these little shuttles."
Wow.
At least I think it was 50. I can't remember precisely. All I know is it was a lot.
Is this them right here?
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. If it does it say what size it is in the catalog?
Yeah.
Because the ones I did were
3.5
small.
3.5 by 2.5 by 1.5 inches.
That sounds like them.
Yeah. Well,
That
there's two
sounds
of them
like
in the
them.
auction.
Yeah. And he had me make a whole bunch of these things. And so I did them all up. And again, I still like my first job. I'm not going to ask questions. But then I was like, okay, this is just bugging me. I have to know. It's like, Greg, why so many? Are they doing some sort of a like landing base shot of the interior of the mothership where you're going to look down and see this vast amount of these little shuttles sitting about? He said, "Oh, no, it's much simpler than that." He laughed. He says, "I'm giving them away to the crews as to kiss ass to the company."
Oh, that's so cool.
I'm giving them away to kiss ass up to the companies. And remember that it's always important to stay on the good side of the people producing the show.
Well, these may be the ones you built on page
of the little
436.
shuttles. It might be, but again, I didn't do anything distinctively to them. I had to do them exactly as Greg wanted them.
You didn't write Max and the serial number on the side or anything like that?
No, there were no serial numbers on them.
Oh.
They're all practically indistinguishable from each other.
So you worked on? Did you work there for a while, or what?
Yeah? I mean, for the duration of the project.
Yeah.
And then when that was done, it's that the way it is in the business. It's like being a gypsy. The job is done. Well, you move on and find some other work. And I was lucky enough that after that, I found work at another shop that was up here in the San Fernando Valley, working for a fellow named David Stipes, who was also working on V, the TV series, and he knew Greg. And that was kind of like a little bit of an entry to that. And I worked for David Stipes for like 3 years working on different things. My first feature film that I got my name in the credits was while I worked at David Stipes. That was on Real Genius.
Love that movie.
It's one of mine. I think it's a really underrated 80s comedy that I think deserves a lot more attention, because I think it's a lot better than most of the other 80s comedies that are really, I think, overhyped and over-remembered. But I worked on doing some of the detail work for the suborbital attack shuttle you see at the beginning of the film. And then I and another fellow, we made a large, because that orbital attack shuttle is only about maybe 2.5 feet long. It's not really big. And the laser cannon on the back is even smaller. Well, they wanted to do close-ups of that laser cannon. Obviously, we couldn't do just close-ups of the model as is, because they wanted to show parts of it moving. And so we built a big section, as what we like to call a bigature, because it's a big miniature. We built a big miniature of just that section of the laser cannon to be shot close up. And it was stop motion animated rather than putting motors and everything into it. But it was stop motion animated by a well-known, noted animator of the time named Dave Allen. And my boss at the time, Dave Stipes, was old friends with Dave Allen. They had both gotten their starts way back in the day working on all the old stop motion animated Pillsbury Doughboy commercials.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo!
And Dave, it's funny because of Dave's peculiar body chemistry, he had to start wearing gloves when he would stop motion animate the Pillsbury Doughboy, because the chemicals in his skin, his fingertips, would leave yellow marks on the foam of the Stay Puft Marshmallow. The Pillsbury Doughboy. That's the other famous marshmallow man.
Yeah.
Anyways, but so I'd worked for Dave, for like 3 years or so. And I'd worked with Greg for the one project, but I would still see him every once in a while at conventions and whatnot. And after working at Dave Stipes, I ended up working for another shop named Robert Short Productions, which was back down in Mar Vista, literally on the same alleyway, the same street where Greg's shop was. So during lunchtime, sometimes during breaks, I'd go down the alleyway and go see Greg and what he was up to and whatnot. So I still stayed in contact with him, and I would always go over there and go, boy, you're getting to do some really cool stuff, Greg. He said, yeah, but you know what? They aren't paying for shit, and we have to get it done so quickly.
Yeah.
So, which is typical in the industry. So,
Yeah.
So
Max, how big were these shops? How many people typically would be working?
Well, Greg's shop was pretty small, really. I never saw anything more than maybe 5 people working in Greg's shop. And then of course, Greg himself, so 6. When I worked at David Stipes, there was maybe 8 people. And that was including his wife, because she was his accountant. And then at Bob Short's, there was quite a bit more bigger shop, because with the projects we were doing, I would say there was like maybe 15, 20 people working at Bob's. When I was at Bob's, that's when I worked on Beetlejuice, and there was a lot of makeup effects work and things involving molding and casting rubber parts for a lot of the effects work for Beetlejuice being done. So there was a lot more people of that sort of ilk doing stuff, and we did the kids' TV show Captain Power at Bob's shop. Lots and lots of things that we did. Masters of the Universe, the feature film there. We made all of the armor for Skeletor's army, and there was like 300 suits of armor, all vacuum formed. We had to do.
Wow.
Yeah, we had I think in total there was 300 suits of armor. and we had to have at least like 200 of, no, maybe about 150 of them done when the film started, filming all those scenes. And then we just kept making them and sending them to set as we were getting things done. Literally at the end of every like 2 days, whatever was done got sent to set, because a lot of it was being used to replace things that would get damaged. There was a lot of stunt work in it. And after that intense work, I was like, I'm burnt. And I went to Japan for 2 weeks for a vacation. That was my first time ever getting to go to Japan. I love Japan. Oh my God, I would love to go back to Japan. Tokyo is like New York, only clean, and the people are really nice. You know.
So, Max, tell me the story of how you got that front half of the robot torso from Lost in Space.
Oh, yes. Long story. I'll try and make it as short as possible. Greg had the original molds. He got the original molds from 20th Century Fox. And these molds were plaster and burlap and with some wood frames to reinforce them. And we were doing Starship Troopers at the time. And so we were having a lot of stuff fiberglassed by this one shop. We had a runner that would go and run to the fiberglass shop and pick up parts. And when he came back, he said, I saw this weird thing. It was kind of like a drum shape, and it had these two like weird arm socket and these holes in the front that looked like for eyes and something. And Mike and I both looked at each other like, I had a toy of the Lost in Space robot sitting on my desk, and I picked it up and I said, did it look like this? He goes, yeah, just like that. I said, oh my God. And so Mike and I got in our cars and we drove there immediately. And we asked the guy what was about this. He said, oh, well, it was an extra and the guy didn't want it. And so we bought it from the guy for like $50. And we brought it back to the shop. And we had it, and that's how we ended up with it. Now, mind you, the molds were not there. Greg had picked up, I guess, some copies that he had made for something. I never asked Greg what they were for, and the molds were gone. But there was just one leftover front half of the body shell. Through going to conventions and talking with different people who were Star Trek and Lost in Space fans and whatnot, I met this very, very, I was to find out, very incredibly disreputable fellow named Fred Barton. Mm-hmm. Just, I don't care who hears this. I don't care what anybody says. The guy was a scumbag with a capital S.
I've heard that, I think.
Yeah, he is to be avoided at all costs. He has screwed and burned so many fans. It's ridiculous. But, what P.T. Barnum would always say, another sucker is born every day. He heard my story and he said, I'll tell you what, I can get that torso and finish the other half of it, because he would have all the dimensions and then basically turn and make the back half out of foam and then make the molds and everything. I said, well, Mike and I talked about it. I said, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. The condition is, though, when you're done with it, Mike and I both get a casting, and we want the originals back, both the one you create and the original that we gave you. And he agreed to it, and he said that he could do this in 2 months' time. We're like, fine. We want a deadline when this is going to come back to us. Well, 2 months became 3, 3 months became 6, 6 months became a year, and so on and so forth. Couple of years go by, maybe about a year and a half. I can't remember precisely. And I see him at a convention. He's sitting behind a table selling his wares of ill-gotten gains of things that he was recasting and then selling to other fans of stuff. Now that I think about it, he had a Lost in Space pistol. So God knows if maybe that's where he got his from borrowing it from Greg. I don't know. Anyways, I said to him, look, and when somebody pisses me off like this, I have no compunction of making a scene. And I was being rather loud in my statements about what he had done and what he had failed to promise and fulfill and everything. It's like, if it was up to me, I think you really need to come through with this and complete your part of the bargain before other people start hearing about what kind of a scumbag you are. And I'm being very loud. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. Well, sure enough, when you light a fire under somebody's ass, they finally go ahead and come through with it all. About a week, maybe 2 weeks later, somebody shows up at our shop. I wasn't there. I didn't see the person. Somebody else was in the front office area when the person came in. He came in with the torso and he put it down and he left without ever saying anything. So wow. Mike and I, we got the torso tooling back, but he never fulfilled his part of the promise of giving each of us a casting and that we would want the original molds back. So he's a really bad example of a human being. And that's how I got the torso that Mike and I got.
All right, so back to a good example before we wrap up here. Tell me about the last time you talked to Greg.
Good idea.
Last time I saw Greg was a couple of years before he passed away. He seemed in good spirits. I ran into him at one of the smaller collectible shows, and Greg was always there with a smile on his face, looking at all the cool stuff, and just like a kid in a candy store. And we just nonchalantly chatted about what were we looking for and what did we just get, and showing each other the things we had bought at the time. And that was it. It wasn't like a big deal or anything, because I didn't know that he was in ill health. Again, Greg was a very private person, and it was such a nice, nondescript meeting. In a weird way, it's nice that that's my last memory of him. Because I've had some friends who've passed away and who've had very difficult lives and health issues, and it's not a nice way to remember somebody.
Yeah.
And so that being the last time I saw Greg, it was a really nice way, because that's the way I'll always remember Greg.
Doing what he loved doing, looking, and being around
having a great time and having a smile on his face and just being happy for existing, and kind of like the way I think of myself. I'm just this kid who never grew up. I like my toys. I like my things. And I want to surround with myself with the things I like and enjoy that make me happy. I've got exactly
at this moment you're surrounded by like-minded people. So
and if you could see my bedroom, surrounded by like-minded toys. But I just love toys and models and the things that I collect and the things I surround myself, because I'm at that point in my life. It's like, if I can't have the things I love and surround myself with them, what's the point in having them? Because I have a storage of my own, and I think it's that time in my life where, I need to start thinking about getting rid of a lot of this stuff, because none of my stuff is hugely valuable like Greg's stuff. I have a few things here and there. I was able to save one of the original shrimp arms from Beetlejuice from when we made that. I have all of the copies of the sketches I was given for making the carousel hat, including they gave me a big piece of the original fabric that his jacket is made out of. And it's not black and white. It looks black and white on camera, but it's not black and white. The suit jacket was custom made, but it was made out of fabric that you would use for making awning out of, because they found some black and white striped awning fabric that was really nice that they liked, but white doesn't read well on camera, and he's supposed to be this guy who's dead. So they took the fabric, they rinsed it through a greenish gray dye. So if you were to see his real suit up close, it's not black and white. It's dingy grayish green, white, and black. And the black isn't pure black. It's been rinsed through this grayish green wash. I have an original helmet used in 2010 because Greg made helmets. Greg made all the duplicate spacesuits for 2010 because the way 2001 ends, there's a couple spacesuits and a helmet still sitting there on the rack. They had to be there in the docking bay when they go into the pod bay. And through a turn of events, I ended up with the blue helmet from 2010. And I got it autographed by both Care Delay and Gary Lockwood.
Oh, nice.
Well, one of those helmets is in this auction too, so you may want to see what it sells for.
Oh boy! Well, in the catalog, what do they list it starting at?
Their starting bids are very low.
Yeah, they are, but I think they're doing that purposely to see how far they can go.
I think me and Brian are the only people who like that movie.
I like 2010. I'm going to be a heretic at this moment and say I like it better than 2001.
It's starting at $2,000, but it's going to go for considerably more.
Yeah, well,
with the
and it's
chest
not
pack
autographed.
and the backpack and the chest pack. But it's going to go for way more than that.
Yeah, and my helmet is autographed by the two actors, so
that's cool.
Cool.
I've got a question for both Brian and Max. Were either of you on Greg's Christmas card list? Because apparently he sent out interesting Christmas cards every year.
Yeah, I still have a couple of them stashed away somewhere. And God bless Greg. I love those. And I'm gay and I didn't care. He would send out these really salacious Christmas cards with some hot girl and wearing next to nothing, posing with like Robbie the Robot or with a Lost in Space robot or something. And just this really like pinup girl artwork style poses. And I just found it just hilarious. I love it.
I actually did an eBay search recently, and a bunch of his Christmas cards were up on eBay.
Were they photographs or drawings?
No, they're photographs. He would have he would have pinup girls come into the studio and pose with his props and models and send those out as his Christmas cards.
We need to do that.
Yep. and they were back in the day. You could go into like 1 hour photo and you give them a photograph and they'll put some they'll Photoshop some little Christmas element over it and they would print out these photos, like 50 or whatever you wanted, and then you could they give you the envelopes and you could send them out as Christmas cards.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. Well, we've gone. Boy, we could go much longer. Max, we'd love to have you on again. This is great. Love hearing about your stuff. Love hearing about how you knew Greg and your interactions with him and all that stuff. That's awesome.
Well, I think of myself as being very, very lucky to have had a mentor like Greg. That's why I thought of Greg as my mentor, because he really taught me a lot of things about detailing and scale and force perspective, and to always be thinking, because our jobs as effects artists is to constantly solve a problem. We have to make what somebody else has written and make it real and make it believable to the best of our ability in whatever time and budget we've been given. I've done my fair share of low budget projects.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Dave, I know you're trying to wrap up, but on your list of things that you've worked on, I have to ask you just about Troops, which was like one of the first Star Wars fan films. So you worked on that.
I did. It was completely by accident. My friends who played all of the stormtroopers were art students at Cal Arts, and if you watch the little short Troops, you'll notice in some of the long shots, two of the stormtroopers are wearing high heels, like spiked high heels, white patent leather spiked heels.
Oh, that's funny.
Those are girls. Those are
nice.
Girls. So like there was 5 of them, 2 of them were girls, and you see them in the short wearing their high heel shoes with the rest of their stormtrooper armor. They were the ones behind making it. Kevin Rubio directed it, but they were the ones who got all the props and stuff together and knew other people who could get the CGI work done and such. And they came to me because they knew I had an R2 who was all fiberglass, but he wasn't in any near sort of condition to be filmed. And they said, well, do you have something? We're going to be filming this weekend and we don't have a droid yet. Sitting on my desk at the shop, this is way back when I was working for HMS Creative with Mike Moore and Steve Horst, I had my Tom Servo replica I had built for myself. Because I'm a huge MST3K fan, I got to be friendly with the guy who had been the prop master on the show. I went back east to Minnesota. They actually threw an MST3K convention, and I got to go on the sets where they filmed MST3K. It was filmed in an industrial warehouse area in a little suburb called Eden Prairie. And they had two units that were next to each other, and they cut a big hole in between the two of them. And one side was filming and one side was production. And he gave me some original Tom Servo parts, and I made my own Tom Servo prop. And he was sitting there, and I said, well, all I have is this. And I handed them my Tom Servo, and that's how the Tom Servo ended up in Troops.
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
Wow.
But that's what? It's actually, truthfully, I think it's funnier to have that than if they had actually had a real R2.
No, that's true. That's great.
That's great. Well, again, thanks again. How can people, you said you have a podcast, how can people find you?
I have my own podcast. It's called the Max Effects Podcast. That's MAXEFX. And my podcast is out on Apple Podcasts and where all other fine podcasts can be found. My co-host Kevin Toth and I will talk about different aspects of my career or the business and whatnot. And so they can find much longer versions of some of the stories I've told here today there. So
terrific. Well,
now I know you guys
check that out.
I know you guys are really big on action figures as well as the 12-inch scale. I did some research work for my buddy Nanjing Tam, who owns X06.
All right.
And they're going to be putting out very soon a figure that I was instrumental helping him on doing lots of research for, is the Star Trek III Lord Krug Christopher Lloyd figure.
Oh, awesome.
Is coming out, and I was the research consultant for that figure.
I have that on pre-order.
Yeah, they've put that on pre-order. Looks amazing.
They've done such an amazing job. I mean, I had only ever seen pictures of it until I went to Vegas this last year, and I saw it up close, and it looks just as good up close as it did in pictures. And for the same reason, it's I just love their Star Trek figures.
They're doing an awesome job.
They're amazing. Yeah.
They are.
They're available
really
at Fanboy Collectibles.
Several of them.
Yeah, they are. So, but yeah, you can find me there. I'm on Facebook as Max Cervantes. I'm on Instagram as Maximas1138. So you can do a search. You'll find me if you want to.
Check them out. Yeah, and we'd love to have you on again. We'd love to hear more about your career and stuff. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Anything else?
Thank you for having me, guys.
Oh, you're very welcome. As we found over the years being friends with Brian knows people. So we like to say
Brian knows where all the bodies are buried.
Right.
Exactly.
No, but I know the people who know where they are. I don't know where the bodies are, but I know the people who know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, and thank you, Brian, for making this happen.
Yes. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys.